Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my spirit, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. In his book, Thank God for Evolution, Michael Dowd talks about the evolution of the human brain. Dowd is an evolutionary theologian rather than a scientist, and so he gives each of the evolutionary developments of the brain a cutesy name, something I think that a scientist wouldn't do. But I like that because it helps me to remember the various developments of the brain better, and so I can describe them to you. To the original part of the brain that sits at the top of the spinal cord, Dowd gave the name lizard legacy. That's the part of our brain that we inherited from the dinosaurs. It spontaneously reacts to threats and opportunities. We say it is our lizard brain at work when faced with danger. We choose fight or flight, and we choose that without hardly even thinking about it. It's a quick and natural, spontaneous reaction. And that spontaneous reaction is essential for our existence. It helps us to escape danger. But over time, that wasn't enough. And Dowd says that as we evolved, our brain evolved too, to fill us out more. And I want to talk about the second stage of the brain, which he talks about. Dowd said that we weren't strong enough to continue on our own with the lizard legacy. The dinosaurs may have been powerful enough to protect themselves, but human beings couldn't. And so he says that the next part of our brain to develop was the one that he calls the small furry mammal. That part of the brain that seeks out others for protection. And it also seeks out others for bonding. We become social animals. We form a tribe. It's necessary for our development to be together with each other. To my mind, the limits of this desire to bond were reached when one tribe began to fight against the other, and that was always the way I focused on that after I read Dowd's book. It seemed like when we'd taken care of our basic necessities such as food and shelter and protection, then we went about trying to eliminate each other, and one tribe would go against another. And then other parts of the brain had to develop to get beyond that kind of fighting that was taking place. But a friend reminded me several weeks ago that the need to form groups and to bond with each other is one of the most primitive human needs. And it's still a basic need for all of us. Yes, there is a destructive side when the group forms. But if we do not have community, then we shrivel and die. My friend wanted to make the case that the tribe is the most basic of human communities. It provides support, protection, and a sense of belonging on a personal scale that larger communities are unable to. Of course, the family or the clan is much more basic than that, I guess, but we cannot survive as just part of a family or a clan. We need that larger group that's big enough to be able to provide our needs and yet small enough for us to feel we are able to belong. If the social unit gets too large, then it becomes too impersonal to meet our needs for close personal bonding. I wanted to make the case to him, when he was telling me this, that Canada was an example of a group of smaller tribes existing within a larger tribe. On each level, the smaller group and the larger group, there's a different sense of belonging, but a sense of belonging nevertheless. I want to make the case that in Canada, the smaller tribes continue to exist because of multiculturalism. Immigrants and refugees, when they come to Canada, can often find groups of people who share the same racial, ethnic, and cultural identities. And so there's a community that understands and supports them right from the beginning because they come from the same origins. But John Ralston Saul, the husband of the former Governor General Adrian Clarkson, has written that the genius of Canada's immigration and refugee policy has been that as soon as a newcomer arrives, they're given landed immigrant status. They become Canadian. And they're already on the road to becoming full Canadian citizens. Then they're encouraged to take out full citizenship as soon as possible. So newcomers to Canada are encouraged to become part of the national fabric as quickly as possible. And the results of that are seen, of course. They quickly begin to develop an identity and a sense of belonging as a Canadian. And that's shown in the broad representation of racial, ethnic, and cultural groupings in the Canadian Parliament. At the same time as they identify deeply with their own cultural groups, people also identify as Canadians through and through, and feel as much a part of the cultural mosaic as any of us who are multi-generational Canadians. Tribes within a tribe, feeling supported, protected, with a sense of belonging at each level of their connections. After I had that conversation with that friend about the social cohesion of the tribe, I decided I wanted to speak about that here. That really struck me as something that I think is important. And so I decided I was going to speak on it, and I put it on for this Sunday. And then I went and looked at the lectionary readings and discovered that here in the lectionary was the story of the tribes of Israel gathering together to elect David king. It was almost as if the talk grew out of the reading. How is that so? How do they connect like that? It's hard to understand that, and we may each have our own ideas about how that happens. And I don't want to make too much of the parallels, except to reflect on the fact that that choice of David to be king led Israel to their greatest time as a nation. And given the kind of nation we are, and the problems we're facing right now in the world, we might find strength and hope in that parallel story. The story of Israel's greatness, perhaps giving us courage as we try to find our place in the world. But I want to return to the present and to suggest that where the sense of being supported and protected and belonging in their own community exists for many newer Canadians, it has been disappearing in the broader society amongst people whose roots in Canada are deeper. It's an irony, it seems to me, that people like most of us, whose families have been in Canada for generations, the institutions or gatherings which constituted our tribe have been disappearing. For us, for instance, us gathered here, the United Church of Canada has been a faith community, but it has also been our tribe. If we moved to another part of Canada, one of the first things we would do would be to seek out a united church and find a community in which we already belong to, in a sense, because it was a community we were familiar with people who were kind of like us. If we visited a united church in another part of the country, and I suspect that's still so, if we visit another united church, we can get into conversation with somebody in the congregation and find out that they know somebody that we also know, and then the connections are made. Somebody said one day, I remember a church official from Toronto coming to visit the congregation and saying, it's good to be in this part of the church village. And there is that sense in which we are a church village. We're bonded together by those connections. And that's still part of us who are in the church community, but it is no longer so for those who have left, and many of course have. Perhaps they found another tribe, another community to which they can belong. But increasingly, people are finding themselves isolated, especially as they grow older. Loneliness is a big problem in our society. I keep asking the question when groups gather here at the church, I keep asking the question, and I ask it again now. Where in Lake Country do people find community and a sense of belonging? Where do people go and look if they're alone and are trying to find a place to belong? I see Nori's young family who live here in Lake Country connecting with a lot of other families around their children's sports. School and sports have always been a gathering place for families around which to build good communities, and they still are. A place where we can make not just friends, but people we can rely on. But I think that there are many seniors in Lake Country, as elsewhere, who are isolated and lonely. Keep on hearing stories from the women who work in the thrift shop about people who come in to the thrift shop almost every day, not to buy anything. They come and they look through it and they see what's new there and they see who's there and they talk to people. They aren't there to buy. They're there to see somebody, to have some sort of social interaction. We were talking about that, and Jim Taylor said maybe we need to knock a hole through the wall from the thrift shop into the church and put a coffee pot up in the room down at the end of the hall so that people can come and sit, have coffee, and talk together. It seems like an outing for them, a place where they can be around other people. Nori's son has a pizza shop in the shopping center where the A&W is. He says the A&W is the seniors' meeting place. Where seniors are always gathering for coffee. He says it's a place for the seniors and for his daughter Maddie, who loves the A&W and goes there all the time. But so seniors gather there for coffee. The Wooden Nickel is another place where people gather for coffee. So there are places that people seek out each other and gather. I wonder sometimes if those places have the same kind of caring community that exists as we interact day by day, week by week, month by month, so that there is some sort of caring. I mean, just in the kind of thing Sharon said today about Julie, that's something that we all respond to, and that's something important to us, because this is a community that's really important. There are a few of us older men who get together for lunch at the coffee shop on an irregular basis. One time after we'd had lunch there and we were preparing to go home, a younger woman who was sitting nearby said that she'd been listening in on our conversation. It isn't hard to do because we're all older now, we have to speak loud so we can hear each other. But she said that wasn't what drew her into the conversation. She said what drew her into the conversation was how vulnerable and candid we had been with each other. We were having kinds of conversations amongst each other that she would never have expected older men to have. On another occasion, as we were getting up to leave, a man came over and asked how one joined a group like this, because he'd been longing for the kind of discussion and sharing that we were having. Someone took his name and telephone number, but I suspect that because no one is really in charge of the group, the telephone call hasn't been made. I don't know that. But as I was thinking about it, as I was recalling these events, it dawned on me that I think none of us has been willing to say that what has brought us together has been our church community. Let me just speak for myself. When people say, how do you get together? I'm more likely to say, oh, we're just a bunch of friends who get together, than I am to say, well, we go to church together and so we gather. I think I wouldn't want to burst the aura of the group by saying we belong to church. It would have a connotation for people that might be a negative one. But I suspect we're still reluctant to identify ourselves as church, even though it's that fact that leads us to be the kind of group that people admire. That is because of our connections here and the way we bond with each other here that makes each other people look at us and say, I want to be a part of a group like that. It's something to think about. Not as a means of growing the church. That isn't why I mention this. But because I believe that finding a community like this church, a community that is nurturing, supportive, protective, a community where we belong, I think that's difficult. And without such communities, I'm convinced that our spirits wither and die. Let's have a few moments to contemplate that.